Philippians, because the Apostle Paul tells the church there, rejoice, rejoice always. And to cast our cares upon Him if we're anxious, and He will guard our hearts and He will guard our minds. And it's interesting that for all of us at times, rejoicing in God can at times become difficult. And it becomes difficult for different reasons. But today I want to talk expressly about the reason that we don't rejoice because we're depressed. Now you think, wait a minute, depressed. Why should we depressed, and why would a Christian be depressed? What do we really have to be depressed about? Because we're in a country that is absolutely so wonderfully blessed, has so many things. We have blessings, coming out our ears, as it were. And yet, in all of this, we find that we can be depressed as individuals. And I talk to people all the time who have an element of depression. What I want to do today, though, is we all are familiar with the prophet Elijah. A great man, did great things for God. But we're going to look specifically at one incident in his life where this prophet, Elijah, got depressed. He got depressed to the point that he wanted God to take his life. I don't know if any of you have ever been there or but you may have kind of darkened the doors of that, thinking, what in the world am I doing? Why am I feeling this way? What's my purpose in life? And it's not going well. I believe that in this particular example of Elijah, we can learn a lot of lessons about our life. And we can learn from Elijah. And we can learn some of those lessons. And it isn't that Elijah's example just stopped there in the life that he lived. We, of course, know that Jesus talked about the coming of Elijah beforehand, the preaching of that. But James also talks of Elijah in James chapter 5 and verse 17. And this is what he says of Elijah, this great prophet of God. He reminds the brethren there in his writing, Elijah was a man just like us. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. And again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced crops. Well, the part I want to focus on is that he's a man like us. I'm not sure that we've prayed and it stopped raining, and we pray again and it started raining. I was lamenting the fact that this past week I was expecting rain and didn't come and the like, so I was a little discouraged by it not coming, and in that discouragement sometimes you can forget that indeed this is a beautiful day that God has given to us and provided for us. But we want to take a look at Elijah, the man of God, living in a world of sin. Now, some of these things we're going to be able to relate to because he was living in a world of sin. Israel was very, very involved in sin in Elijah's day. Israel had turned its back on God. My wife read from the book of Psalms, great is the nation whose God is God, that is a great nation. And Israel lived in a nation, or Elijah did, on a nation that had turned its back on God, all in spite of all that God had done for them and continued to do for them. Not only had they turned their back on God, they had gone into Baal worship. And not only had they gone into Baal worship, but their king and queen were pretty bad people. Ahab and Jezebel. Pretty bad. And there was more known about Jezebel than there was Ahab. And this is gender bias to say it, but there's nothing more wicked than a wicked woman. Unless it's two wicked men. But Jezebel, obviously, she was a case, to say the least. The government was corrupt. The nation was in a national drought. Things weren't happening. And obviously drought produces all kinds of problems. We would think not only in terms of food, but it produced all kinds of problems in terms of the economy, because if you don't grow things, you can't sell things, you're not eating. It was a miserable time for the country. People were negative, and people were hurting, and the mood was very negative. Does any of this sound familiar to you? It's amazing how that the attitude of the country is reflected in our lives. And we have to deal with that. But Christians like Elijah, we also find ourselves in a broken world. And that is something very important for us to recognize when we're talking about being depressed. It is something that goes unnoticed in a way, because we've become so accustomed to living in a broken world, but we live in a very broken world. A world where we recognize that even though in a moment that our lives might be good, the lives of others can be very, very miserable. We can be in the sunshine in California and the East Coast being hit by a hurricane. Or we can be in an earthquake in California and the rest of our country is doing well. And while the rest of our country might be doing well, the world may be in a state of chaos. And while we may be doing well in our home, our cities are in a mess. And while we may be healthy, others may be unhealthy. Others may be facing the end of their life. And we face these things. We're filled with a world filled with pain and sorrow. And it can be depressing, to say the least. Jesus also said we're in a mourning state for the world. And I put this in as a reminder for us. Jesus said, "Blessed are they that mourn, for they shall be comforted." Jesus recognized the world in which we live in, and of course we recognize with Jesus when he looked over Jerusalem. What a sad state of affairs that was. And it was discouraging, obviously, as he said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you, but you wouldn't let me do that. You wouldn't allow that. Well, I'm going to suggest that that is also true of people who are in depression. You might want to gather them and bring them in, but they won't allow you to do that. And you think, well, why wouldn't they want to be comforted? Because they're in a state of depression, unless you understand what depression is all about. Now, I'm not going to go into clinical depression or anything today, but I do want to mention a couple of things so you know. We need to know and understand and appreciate that as we have advanced in medical science, we recognize that depression, and a greater number of people are diagnosed with depression. One is a chemical, a brain chemical problem, difficulty. Now, we readily agree with diabetes. That we're not getting the insulin, or we're getting too much insulin, and we got a problem. What is difficult for us to admit is that we have a chemical problem in our head. And there are ways that we can work with and manage that. But we do need to understand this, that when a person is depressed, no matter what you say to them, their world is helpless, their world is hopeless, and it is impossible. That's what you have to realize. And unless you've been there, you can't appreciate that to the same degree, that hopelessness and that helplessness that you have. We're going to find this is true, and I want to mention this so that we kind of understand that there's also situational and kind of seasonal depression. As we grow older, it isn't seasonal depression like winter comes and it's gray and cloudy. By the way, light does change the way in which you feel and the like, and there is light therapy. So this is not a sermon on psychology, but I do want you to understand some of these things. As we grow older in our seasons, we have to recognize that we begin to realize that our life is getting short. We only have X number of years.
Feeling the blues today, or tired of life already? Do you have questions about life, or need spiritual advice? We can help. Log on to worldwidechurchofgod.com or wcgfairfield.blogspot.com and stay connected to reality. The Worldwide Church of God in Fairfield, Santa Rosa, and Modesto are located in the San Francisco Bay Area, regarded as the most prosperous region in the United States. We believe Jesus Christ when he proclaimed in Matthew 6:24 that serving God is more important than serving mammon. We welcome everyone to come and worship and fellowship every Saturday at the times listed on your screen and on our website, worldwidechurchofgod.com.